Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Success Sessions. This one today is episode 6, and it is all about student involvement in law school. We are so excited to have you join us this morning. We have some incredible folks here on the panel from all over the country getting ready to talk to you about all things involvement. And so I know that we're kind of wrapping up the year here for most folks. We're either wrapping up midterms or preparing for finals, depending on where you're located. But this is the perfect time to start thinking about what you want your law school career to look like, especially if you're wrapping up your first year. What sorts of things do you want to look to for your second year of law school and even your last year and beyond, and how those things can help you? So without further ado, I'm going to introduce TJ to say hello, and then we'll swing it on over to the panel.
Hello, everybody. Again, I'm TJ. I'm thankful for the panelists today. I know that student involvement was something that I was weary about when I started law school, and I'm excited to hear, why you guys decided to get involved and how you got to the positions in which you hold today.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll start it off. We'll have each of the panel members introduce themselves super briefly, going into, just kind of where you are in school, your year, and all of the wonderful things that you're involved in. We'll start with Tatiana.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Allie and TJ, for having me this morning. I'm excited to talk to you all about student involvement. So my name is Tatiana Hyman. I am a 2L at Fordham School of Law. I'm from the Bronx, New York, and I graduated from Penn in 2017. And currently at Fordham, what I'm involved in is I'm the incoming editor-in-chief of the Fordham Law Review. I'm also on Fordham Moot Court. I'm also a legal writing teaching assistant, a 1L tutor, and I'm involved in the Community Economic Development Clinic. So I'm looking forward to talking to you all today about my experiences.
So basically, there's nothing she has not done. So everybody on here, make sure to ask your questions. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but that's, our big thing is just questions throughout. So obviously, TJ and I have a bunch of questions prepared that we'll ask, but if any of our attendees have questions, please post them in the chat or just raise your hand using that feature so we can get your question answered. All right, let's head over to Marshall.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marshall Janevicius. I'm excited to speak with the other panelists, and thank you, TJ and Allie, for putting this together. I've heard great things and good feedback from these sessions. I go to UIC John Marshall in Chicago. I'm a 3L, be finishing up just in about 6 weeks here. I'm a JD/LLM student. My LLM will be in International Business and Trade. I worked for John Marshall's International Human Rights Clinic for 2 semesters. Kind of got a feel of both. I did one before pandemic in person and then one last spring online. So I kind of saw the difference between the two. I also serve on our SBA's executive board as the graduate student liaison. So our school has more than just JD students. So I try to bridge the gap between MJ and LLM students with the rest of the school. And also for about 2 years now, I've been working for a solo practitioner in Chicago, a small practice that does mainly real estate, foreclosure, family law, civil litigation, so a little smattering of everything.
Again, a little bit of everything. So again, encourage you guys all to ask your questions. Marshall's someone who's gotten great work experience on top of great LLM experience. 2 areas that I think a lot of us should ask some questions about and get to learn more. And last but not least, Anthony, I see you are joining us. Thanks so much for coming on this morning. If you could give us just a brief introduction, your year, where you are in school, and all the great things you're involved in.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to apologize for my tardiness. I was attending a meeting with the Texas Legislative Black Caucus and the president of the University of Texas in regards to the Eyes of Texas fiasco. If you haven't heard about it, you should check it out. It's pretty concerning. But my name is Anthony Collier. As Allie mentioned, I'm a 2L at the University of Texas School of Law. I also serve as the student body president of the University of Texas School of Law and as chair-elect of the National Black Law Students Association, which is the largest student-run nonprofit in the nation. I'm thankful to be here. I look forward to sharing any advice I can to help out.
Anthony, would you mind touching on that meeting and what the issue was, just quickly?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So the Eyes of Texas is the University of Texas School spirit song. It's official song and it's unofficial fight song. And so they perform it at games and graduations and pretty much every chance they get. But the song is rooted in racism. The term the Eyes of Texas comes from a Confederate general who used the term the Eyes of the South to inspire his troops during the during the Civil War. Also, it's sung to the tune of I've Been Working on the Railroad, which is an extremely offensive and racist folk song. And so students would sing the song, but they didn't understand the origin of it until recently, about a decade ago. Basketball players learned what it was about and they refused to sing it. 2 years ago, the Student Government Association debated on it, but during 2020 summer, the football team said, we're no longer going to any fundraising events or recruitment events until you remove the song. And then that kind of was a catalyst for a huge student movement to petition the university to remove the song. And so the university president announced that he was, but one other important thing is too, when we started protesting, donors started writing the president saying all kind of racist stuff about us, about the students protesting the song, and basically saying, if you remove the song, we're not gonna write any more checks. And so our concern is that it seems that the university has chosen profit over people and has bowed to the pressure of the donors in keeping the song. And so the meeting was with the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, which is all the Black elected officials in the state of Texas, along with the Texas NAACP and myself and a representative from the undergraduates, basically telling the university president that he needs to remove the song because we're losing Black recruits on the football team in undergrad. It's racist, it's offensive, and we can't choose profit and tradition over decency and humanity. So that's what the meeting was about. And it was kind of contentious, which is why I ran over, which is why I late, which I apologize for again.
No, I completely understand. And I think obviously the theme of today is student involvement. And that's one thing I think especially minorities and even white students need to be more cognizant of is standing up for what is right. That's also about being involved, right? And we've had issues at UIC John Marshall as well, where coalition of students have spoken out against racist professors and things of that nature. So, I commend your efforts, Anthony.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I second all of that, and thank you so much for sharing. I don't think many of us are in Texas besides you, but if there's anything we can do to help or the Impact Project can do to help, a statement we can put out, please let us know because we would love to support and we do commend your efforts. So no problem on running over. That is way more important than this going on here. Yeah, I see in the chat, student activism is so powerful. It often comes much sooner than administrations and donors are willing to speak out. 1000%.
So I actually did draft the statement today. I'm having my mentor edit it, and once it's ready, I would appreciate y'all to sign on. That would be awesome. So I can send that to y'all once it's ready.
We sure will. Yeah, we'll sign on as the Impact Project and all of our board individually, and then we'll send it out to all of our members in our mailing list to see if they'll sign as well. So thanks so much for sharing. Awesome. Okay, well, again, you guys, this panel is full of movers and shakers and just people that are involved both inside and outside the classroom and outside the four walls of their school, which is just incredible. They're making names for themselves. And so again, one more time, I encourage you all to ask questions today, use the raise hand feature or put it in the chat. To have access to individuals like this is just so special. And I'm sure there's hundreds of students across the country that want to connect with these folks on a day-to-day basis. So I really encourage you all to do that. First question I have for all of you is just simply what propelled you to become involved outside of the classroom? Because I think there's this sort of, I don't want to call it a stigma, but some sort of conversation to be had when you start law school that this is hard. Focus on your academics. Don't do anything else, right? If you don't have good grades, nothing else matters. So that's all your focus should be on. And so when you got into law school, when did your mind start to race about, well, maybe I want to do something outside of just my academics? And what kind of started that conversation within yourself? And if you had that conversation with others, who did you chat with about it, and what made you get started? We'll go ahead and start with Tatiana.
Sure. So I would say that I started thinking about getting involved outside of the classroom from the moment I got on campus. 1L is a little bit of a whirlwind. So the advice that you usually get is, focus on class, especially for that first semester. You're trying to get an understanding of everything. Law school related, it's all very different from undergrad. So definitely for the first semester, I did focus on grades a lot. However, I think the first leadership opportunity that I took on was becoming a BALSA 1L rep. And so what that really entailed was, just shadowing the board, getting to understand what the BALSA board did. And I knew I wanted to get involved in BALSA because I'm a student of color. And, I believe, I would say all of my decisions to get involved outside of the classroom are rooted in service. So I just personally believe in giving back and just contributing to the atmospheres that I'm in, and not just being there and taking. I mean, yeah, not just being there and benefiting from it, but also doing whatever I can to benefit the other people who are there. So being a 1L rep, it wasn't a big time commitment. So that was kind of what started me into being involved in BALSA. And then at the end of 1L year is really when a lot of other leadership opportunities come across your plate. So I decided to run for the BALSA executive board. And again, that was just a function of me thinking about, okay, what can I do now to contribute to where I am and to have an impact and to develop my leadership skills as a law student. And then kind of on the journals and competition side, you have the writing competition, you have the moot court competition. And to be honest with you, as a first generation student of color, all of that stuff is kind of like a foreign language at first. But thankfully we had the older student, well, let me not say older, but the 2Ls and 3Ls in BALSA were able to just give us some context about what we should expect. And then it came down to me just making that decision, okay, I could easily not do the writing competition. I could easily not do the moot court competition, but the least I could do is try. And the worst that can happen is that I don't make it on the team, or I don't there's no downside to trying and to putting yourself out there. So that is those are the main things that compel me to do that. And I'll give a little quick anecdote too about moot court specifically. That was a little bit of a harder decision for me because that competition was happening right around, George Floyd's murder. And there was a lot going on just emotionally, and trying to work on a brief and prepare for that competition in the middle of that was very difficult. Thankfully, the students, just in line with the topic of student advocacy, proposed that we extend the competition so that students have more time to kind of get themselves together and to navigate everything that was going on and still do the competition. So I honestly was so close to not doing it. But I something just rose up in me, and I'm this is the time for me to just use this opportunity and to not self-select myself out of this opportunity. So I won't, say that it just comes naturally. It definitely comes from a decision. And for me, that decision is just rooted, like I said, in service and just believing and giving back to the atmospheres that I'm in.
Incredible. Thank you. Marshall, to pose the question to you, why did you decide to get involved? What propelled you to do more than just, your academic classroom activities?
Yeah, sure. So maybe my advice can be kind of learn from my mistakes. I don't think I did it necessarily the right way from the start. I mean, even since high school and through undergrad, I'd be out the door at 7 a.m., not come back till almost midnight, just involved all the time with academics, things outside of class. And then I got to law school and kind of got the scared straight talk during orientation along with everyone else of, hey, you're not going to have time for anything, like only focus on grades first semester. And that's what I did. I didn't go to a single committee meeting or join any groups really my first semester. And then when I wasn't in the top 5 or 10% at the end of that, I was like, well, shoot, that didn't really work. And everyone else has all this kind of are already making these connections. I'd even seen the halls, like members of my cohort were all buddy with 2Ls and 3Ls who are giving them outlines and helping them and giving advice. And I was like, okay, I got to get involved like yesterday. So starting my second semester, didn't really go for any board positions or anything, just kind of didn't go really all into one committee or group. I just kind of put my feelers out and tried to do just a little everywhere to kind of gauge what I'd be interested in. This is back when we were on campus and it was nice. So that's kind of what I would do for my dinner plans every night. They almost always had free food. I was going to have to take a break to go eat anyway. So I'm like, why not just jump into corporate law society or entertainment law, video game law? I mean, just try out and see all what's out there. And I thought that was beneficial. I mean, you don't really have to pay to be part of any of these things. All the opportunities are there. If you're already at school, like just stop in and get a free meal and maybe make some connections there. Now that it's online, I mean, join a group. You don't have to turn your video on. Just listen in while you're folding laundry or doing something else. So I think the opportunities are there. And I mean, I'm not a hiring manager or anything, but I imagine when they're looking at 1L resumes, they don't need to see that you're the president of a society already or this and that. Just if you can list, hey, I'm a member of these 6 or 7 groups, I think that looks great too. You don't necessarily from the start have to be the top individual in a group. Just show that you're kind of making the time and effort to kind of explore out. So I would say it really didn't happen till my second semester. And then I tried to really go all in. I'm happy I focused on school so much the first semester because I think I kind of beat that learning curve more than some other students and really how to be successful in law school. But I think also I could have pulled back slightly on that and started kind of building my network and making connections from the beginning.
Great, thank you. I think that's, a common theme and that we've seen in all of our success sessions is folks sharing not only their successes, but also their failures and the mistakes and the things they wish they would have known. And so I just thank you so much for being so candid about when you got involved and why, because I think so often when people put up a front like, oh, from the very first day I got there, I knew I was going to be the president of this and that. That's intimidating and not everybody knows that. So I really appreciate your candidness there and think a lot of people can learn from that. Anthony, same question for you. Just what propelled you to get involved outside of the classroom? What conversations were had with yourself or others? And, how did you decide that being just a student in the classroom wasn't going to be enough?
Sure. So I was a student activist in undergrad. I attended the illustrious Texas Southern University, which is at HBCU in Houston, Texas. And so going into law school, I already had the mindset of like a student activist, right? And a lot of that stemmed from like one of the first protests I ever organized was in front of the home of Brian Insigne, who was the state trooper who pulled over Sandra Bland, because before we did that protest, no one knew who he was and he was still on the payroll. And we were like, no, he needs to be fired. He really needs to be prosecuted, but y'all at least gonna fire him, which they did after the protest. And so going into law school, I was kind of already had that mindset. But some of my mentors told me immediately, as soon as you get to law school, plug into the Black Law Students Association. And this also goes into AJ's question in the chat, as far as like some organization you can join to avoid unnecessary stress. I say BOSA is critical because or if you're not Black, whatever affinity group that you associate with, be it the Hispanic group, the Asian, Pacific group, or maybe first generation law students, find your group. And because that can, when you're having tough times, you can lean on them and they can see you through. Like BOSA provided me with snacks and outlines and just a network of support and love, which I appreciate, which I still so get back to take also in the field. But yeah, so that's kind of, so my mentor told me to get involved in Boston. As far as SBA, the way I got involved in SBA is I went to a Admitting Students Day, and I happened to meet the current SBA president and the president-elect at the at Admitting Students Day, and they invited me out to drink with them. And then while we were out chilling, it was like, "Hey, you should run for one of our reps as soon as you get to campus." Like, and I was like, "Okay." So that's kind of how I got involved in BOSSA, how I got involved in SBA. But as far as activism, that's an identity I already had going in. It really, your involvement depends on what you want to do, right? If you want to be on law review, like editor of law review, you really do need to like focus on your grades, because law review, and if you want to do big law, like if you want to do public student, but if you want to do big law, they're also going to be looking at your 1L grades. That's like the main thing they're going to focus on. Some schools have a write-on competition where the grades don't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what your grades are, you can write on. But some schools, even if they have a write-on, you still have to meet a certain grade threshold. So depending on what you want to do, definitely take your grade serious, and you can kind of start to get more involved your 2L year. But I definitely say join an affinity group at the least. You know, join your boss to show up to the meetings. And yeah, and then once you're 2L and your 3L year, I would start looking at getting involved in the greater community, like joining your, paying attention to your bar association meetings. And so you're, or like, for example, I'm on the board of the Austin Bar Association, and I'm also a member of the Austin Black Lawyers Association. So, and in our profession, your network is so important. And once you become an established attorney, no one's going to be looking at your grades anymore. They're going to be looking at your work experience. And a lot of jobs come from people you know who you know and who knows you. And so, and one last thing I'll say on this is if you didn't do so well your first year and you wasn't really able to get a job, or maybe you had to do summer school, one great way to, one, beef up your resume, and two, get experience is to do a clinic. So, so doing a clinic as a student attorney, it will give you that experience. You can put it on your resume, and it'll make you more marketable for jobs. That was helpful.
Thank you for that. I think the panelists up here dropping gems. That's one of the, I know a lot of times as one else, they're like, oh, don't get involved with anything, just focus on your grades. But, you know, I think we do have the time, right, to just join one or two organizations. If we show up to one meeting a month for an hour, I think the benefit from that can outweigh the, you know, maybe the time you miss for that hour in studying. Because like Marshall said, you know, he really wasn't that involved his first year, but and he, other people in his classroom were receiving outlines and things of that from upperclassmen. You kind of meet those upperclassmen in those organizational meetings, because you don't have the opportunity to meet them in class because you're in class with a bunch of 1Ls, you know. So you kind of meet those people, and I know that's something that I took advantage of. I joined, you know, 3 or 4 different organizations. I didn't necessarily go to every meeting, but I kind of wanted to get on the email server so that they seen my name and I could pop up and ask them questions. And I received a lot of outlines from upperclassmen, which kind of leads me to the next question. Like, this is for all 3 of you. How did you balance the extracurricular involvement with your studies? And what was the time commitment like when you actually did start to get involved? Let's start with you, Marshall.
Sure. So, like I said before, I think I do better when I'm busier. If I don't have anything else to do, then I don't have to really make a schedule for the week, and then I kind of half-ass an assignment, and then it's done. But if I got 10 things going on, I build in time for each thing. Scheduling and outlining your week hour to hour, I think, has been most beneficial for me. No, it doesn't work for others necessarily. But I think a lot of the, let's go, student organizations, you can be involved in 5 minutes a week or 10 hours a week if you want to. It's kind of up to what you want to put into it. I think on the other hand, some of the more structured or maybe official through the law school extracurriculars, such as moot court, trial ad, journals, law review, clinics, those have more kind of set in stone time commitments. So for example, when I was in the clinic, We had to do 156 hours during the semester, but we all, and I was like, okay, I got to plan in, it's going to be about 10, 12 hours a week. But when I got into it, it's like, oh, it's a lot more work than that. Like you're going to hit the 156 hours by week, like 6, 7-ish. So, but then there's some weeks that you can't really plan for, where you think you're going to be there all week and you only have a couple hours of work. And then, we have to do an emergency motion or some last minute filing, and we're all in the clinic till 10, 11 at night, a couple days in a row. So it really, you can try to plan ahead, but again, you have to be flexible. That's part of being involved, and when other people are counting on you, you kind of got to find the time, and that comes in the form of either Friday nights or sleeping sometimes. But yeah, I know it didn't necessarily answer the question, because it all really does depend on what you're involved with, what types of things you're involved with, and how committed you want to be to it. But I would say, shouldn't feel bad if, hey, you got a brief due for a class that you're getting a grade in, and one of your student orgs is just asking for extra help. You can put up boundaries and say, like, I'm sorry, this week isn't going to work for me. Everyone in law school has done that at a certain point. We get it, that there's certain points in the semester for different students where everything kind of hits all at once. But then again, also, you can usually find time to carve out those couple extra hours. It's amazing how many hours actually are in a week if you start figuring out what you can do. So really up to the individual, and as long as you're organized, I think you can handle way more than you thought you could.
Thank you for that. Tatiana?
Sure. So I'll start with just 1L, my perspective on 1L. During 1L, like everyone knows that you're focused on grades, because it's like, that foundational year. So for me, like the student organizations I was involved in, BALSA, I also joined the first generation student affinity group. They don't expect you, even if you're like a 1L rep or something, they're not going to give you a lot of assignments or projects to work on, because they know that you're very busy. But I think another thing, and it's kind of outside of like student organizations, that I did during 1L was just like attending events that were going on campus. And this was like, there were a lot more perks to it when it was in person, because I think, as Marshall mentioned, or Anthony, I forget which, both of you, I think, touched on like snacks and just like, just popping up to events to get like free meals and stuff. But then you're also like broadening your horizons. You're getting to know what's at the law school. You're kind of getting a lay of the land. So I would say, like, that's something that you can just easily plan for. Like I think a lot of students in general don't like read those weekly emails that go out, which is understandable. There's like a lot going on during 1L. But if you just take a minute to read like whatever your school is sending out about different events that are being hosted, not outside of the affinity groups, right? That are being hosted school wide, you can just attend and see what's going on and see what you might be interested in getting involved in. So I think that's another way to kind of get involved too during 1L outside of like student groups. And then when you get to 2L, as I kind of mentioned before, it's really up to you in terms of like what you want to take on and how much you want to have on your plate. The time commitment for me, so like I said, 1L, it wasn't too much, because I, focus on grades and stuff. But for 2L, I took on a lot. Well, I didn't really feel it until I was in it. But again, like what really drove me was, look, I have this opportunity to be of service at this place, right? And then when it came to like my TA position and my tutor position, I'm like, when I was a 1L, there weren't a lot of students of color in these positions to kind of like understand and relate to the 1Ls of color who are coming in with certain, not knowing certain things. So I just felt like it's also my passion to mentor, but I felt like, it wouldn't take a lot to just take the time to be a TA and to help students develop their writing, or be a tutor, and to like, so in terms of like how I did it, as Marshall mentioned, it really came down to scheduling. Google Calendar is like my everything. I color code things in there. I just put everything. I put reminders as meetings. I tell people, don't try to schedule a meeting with me based on my calendar, because it's just going to be full probably, because I just block off time to do everything. So I think that's a good way to just make sure you don't drop the ball on anything, because that's another thing you also want to keep in mind, and that's important to me. Anything that I'm taking on, I want to do it well. I don't just want to like take it on and then just say, oh, well, I have the title, now I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm really like big on excellence, like doing things properly, doing things to the best of your ability. My name is being put on this. It needs to look good. Like, it needs to be good. So I use my calendar. And I also, as Marshall said, I speak up. If there's something that like is due for class, I tell people, look, I have this coming up. So this time I'm not going to be available. So you have to take control of your schedule and know how to plan things out accordingly.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'm kind of getting flashbacks about, only going to some of the org meetings for the food, right? Because there used to always be food there every time. And with online, they ain't sending us no meals right now. So, and you also touched on another really good point about getting involved too. It's not just joining organizations or getting on the boards. It's showing up to those panels that every school holds during noon, from noon to 1 or from 5 to 6. And not to mention, they're very informative from my experience. So yeah, Anthony.
Can you repeat the question again?
The question was just, how do you balance the extracurricular involvement and what is the time commitment like? Especially, I know as SBA president, the time commitment can probably just, I know a couple SBA presidents and have befriended some, and they're in I don't know how many different meetings and in multiple different rooms. So how do you balance all that?
Yeah, that's a good point and great question. So first of all, can everybody hear me? I know I was having some audio issues. So we good? Okay, perfect. So one of my mentors put it to me like this. Say you have a jar, right? You have a glass jar and you have marbles and you have sand. If you pour the sand in first and then try to pour the marbles in, it won't fit. But if you pour the marbles in first, then you pour in the sand will slip in between the cracks of the marbles, and all of the marbles and all of the sand will both fit in the jar. So it's about having your priorities in order and putting the first thing first. You're a student first. So like, I'm a student activist, but student comes before that, right? When I was in high school, I was a student athlete, but student came before that, because if you failed your classes, you couldn't play, right? You don't pass, you don't play. And so that's the mentality you have to have. As long as you put the first thing first and you make sure if you have an assignment, you're on top of that. If you know you got to read the next day, you do that first. Before you go to the meetings, before you do any of that stuff, you need to take care of business in the classroom. And as long as you do that first, well, with the rest of your free time, you'll be able to find time to be involved.
I love that. That was such a great analogy. That was incredible. So many good answers to that question. I think the biggest thing that all three panelists have touched on is your priorities, your time management, and your organization, right? If you don't have those things, it's not possible. But the thing that I always say is we all have the same amount of hours in a day. To Marshall's point, right? It's crazy how many hours are actually there when you start to like schedule it out. Like Tatiana said, her Google Calendar, I'm a big iCal girl, but when you start to schedule those things, you'll see that you can fit a bit more in, but you do have to have your priorities straight, like Anthony said, because otherwise you'll be spreading yourself too thin. And I think the biggest point I want to just hammer home quick before we move on to the next question and get into all of your individual accomplishments in different affinity groups and organizations is just that if you're going to do something, do it well. To Tatiana's point, I think sometimes there's this misconception that just adding to your resume by saying you're, on the board of this, and that can boost your resume. And it can in some ways, but what are you going to do if you get asked in an interview, what did you do in X role? And you really didn't do anything in X role, right? Because you spread yourself too thin and there's no way to really make an impact in that organization and that bar group, whatever the case may be. So just, hang on to all of that and make sure that if you're going to do something, do it well, because I really think that that's probably the most important thing, rather than having 10 things. Is if you have 5 things and you do them all well, that's, in my opinion, always better than having, more. So quality over quantity, right? I think that's a quote we can live by. So I really want to get into each of all of your individual accomplishments. We specifically brought you all on because it covers basically everything you can do in law school. It's on this panel, right? So if there is some sort of organization, honors program, clinic, you name it, all on this panel. And as I think many of you guys know, both TJ and I have been really involved during law school as well. So we're always here to kind of give our 2 cents, but we're gonna let our panelists take this away. So we have on this panel, the community clinic in Tatiana, the International Human Rights Clinic with Marshall. We have SBA exec board in Marshall and also SBA president in Anthony. We have moot court in Tatiana, and I've done mock trial. So we kind of have both there. We also have BOLSA, and we have, I think, Anthony, you're also involved in the American Bar Association, correct? And the national, yeah. So we have, not only do we have school affiliations here, but we also have national affiliations, which is a great way also to get involved. I know Anthony's touched on that. And we have the editor-in-chief of Law Review, who was just highlighted, I saw on LinkedIn in a fantastic article, Tatiana was, for being in just this elite group of incredible editors-in-chiefs of color that are just taking over, which is just so incredible. And we commend you for your leadership and your initiative there. So I want to start with Tatiana and your involvement. Talk about all of the things that you've been involved in, why you got involved in those specific things, and the process of kind of getting in those roles so that our students can learn more about each specific group.
Sure. And I'll be, to the point. So I'll start with Law Review. So it starts with getting onto a journal. Law Review, or really any journal. Schools have multiple journals. But one thing I wanted to add to the prior question that we were talking about is, I loved Anthony's analogy, but it also comes down to, like, sometimes you just need that internal push. Like, you have to have something that's keeping you going when everything is going like crazy and you have like a million things to do. You have to have like that thing that you remind yourself, all right, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm doing that, right? Doing this. So the way that ties into the writing competition, it usually happens right after your 1L year. So you're usually very tired. You want to take a break. But as I mentioned before, I was like, no, I'm just going to do this. I need to like take advantage of the opportunity. So I got onto the Law Review. And then when, I was on the staff for my 2L. And then the next decision for me was whether I wanted to write a student note, which is pretty much, it's a very arduous process, to say the least, but you pretty much produce your own piece of legal scholarship as a student. And that's something that I really went back and forth on during my first semester. So I was like, this is going to be a lot of work on top of me being the BALSA VP and a tutor and a TA and having class. But again, I was like, I don't know. I feel like I just am always trying to push myself. So I was like, let me just do it. What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen, I don't finish it and I still get my writing credit for school. So I did that. It was very difficult going throughout, but as I was mentioning before, I just had like that constant push, like, all right, I need to do this well. I need to push myself and just like do it. So then once I did my note and I passed publishable quality, every school has like different requirements for getting on the board, but I had to pass like publishable quality, which is like these qualities that your note has to pass. And then once I passed that, I was like, all right, maybe I should consider running for the board now. And again, I was like, I'm so tired from 2L. Like, I did so much. Like, why would I take this on? But again, I was like, this is such a great opportunity just to like represent, right? And I didn't see students of color in these leadership positions as a 1L. So if I could do my part to show other students of color like this is possible, I think that's a huge deal. Like, representation has mattered so much in my life. So that was an interview process, and I went through all of that and became the EIC, which I'm still trying to process, but it's been extremely rewarding. Like, I have no regrets. I'm just happy that I was able to like let go of the doubt and the fear. Like, I was so fearful of applying because I was like, what if I don't do it well? Like, what if I fail? Like, this is so much work. I don't even understand these different things. Like, what is a symposium? I don't even know. But it took that boldness to step out and do it. So that's my personal experience with that. And I mean, you don't have to be the editor-in-chief of the law review. Whatever it takes to kind of get involved in something that's beyond your comfort zone, I think that's what you should be looking to do as a student. Pushing yourself. Yes, doing it in fair, pushing yourself and not just always staying comfortable. No one succeeds being comfortable. Like, that is false. You have to push yourself and be uncomfortable. So that was EIC moot court. I joined at the end of 1L as well. I did the moot court competition, which was really fun. As I kind of mentioned, I went back and forth because it was a lot going on at that time. But again, I felt the responsibility to kind of represent and also just do it for myself. I didn't compete on moot court throughout the year. I just like joined a committee where we got to organize moot court competitions for high school students, which was super rewarding for me because I love talking to students and getting to know students. So that was that. And then becoming a TA, that, every school does it differently. Becoming a 1L tutor, those were things that I really put myself out for and applied for, to kind of just help 1Ls and share some of the skills that I learned during 1L. So yeah.
Awesome. Absolutely incredible. And I think, you hit it on the head. I think sometimes students are fearful of putting themselves out there or getting involved because there's so many other things at play, right? There's so many, just especially being, the goal of our impact project sessions, they're for everyone, but we do have a lot of first gen students that join us and a lot of pre-law students. And I think especially, you mentioned at the beginning, Tatiana, of that, not having any clue what any of this stuff even means, right? Not even knowing what a note is, not knowing what law review is, I always say, I didn't even know what a tort was. And there was an entire class called tort. So I was very like, this is not gonna go well, And so then you add on top of that, like, what are teams? How do you get involved in this? Should I put myself out and run for a position? And so it can be very intimidating, but I think all of our panelists here have just showed you all that, there are people who have paved the way and most importantly, held the door open for the people coming behind them. And that is so important. And so I encourage everyone, when you do hold one of these positions, that you help others fill your role as you go on. So thank you for that. Anthony, if you could touch on just kind of your involvement, one, as SBA president and what that has entailed, but also I'd really love if you could touch on your involvement with the bar associations outside of school, because I think those don't get talked about enough. I know for us at John Marshall, at UAC John Marshall, like this Chicago Bar Association shares a building, right? You can literally walk through a hallway and get there, and some students don't even know what those bar associations are about and what they do. So if you could touch on kind of both of those avenues, how you found out about them, how you got involved, and importantly, how you got leadership roles of that caliber.
Sure. So as far as SBA goes, I ran and was elected as a 1L representative. So that was the beginning, like the fall semester of my 1L year. And while I was on the board, there were some students on the board who had some views that I felt that was problematic. There were some people I knew I didn't want to see be president, and I felt like I had some ideas and leadership experience to bring to the table. So as a 1L in the spring semester, I decided to run for president, which usually doesn't happen. I'm not sure if a 1L has ever been elected president at Texas Law, but I was fortunate enough to win. The students, I guess they agreed with my vision for where we wanted to see the university go, which was great because shortly after being elected, we had summer 2020, which I'm thankful that I was in a position of leadership at the time to steer the law school in the right direction and to make sure that we were on the right side of history. So some of the things I was able to accomplish is establishing a chief diversity officer. For the first time at SBA, we have a member who is committed to the affinity groups, all of the affinity groups, making sure that their voices are being heard, that their needs are being met, and that they're being represented. And he's doing an incredible job organizing all types of events for the affinity groups to build camaraderie and community. And that's especially important during a global pandemic when people feel so isolated. Some of the other things I was able to accomplish is kind of tied into the Austin Bar Association. So I'm the first student ever appointed to the Austin Bar Association. And part of that is because I was active as a member of the Austin Black Lawyers Association. So I just happened to be at a reception, Austin Black Lawyers Association reception, and I met the president-elect of the Austin Bar Association. She was there, like just, I guess, in the mix. And so I didn't even know who she was at the time. We just had a conversation. Lo and behold, she told me, she ended up revealing who she was towards the end. And she said she's thinking about expanding the Austin Bar Association board and making it more inclusive, and that she'll be in touch with that. So she went back to her board, they voted on it, and then they extended the offer to me. They wanted to appoint me to the executive board of the Austin Bar Association. And so, but some of the people on the board were a little hesitant about that because they didn't want it to seem like they were showing favoritism, right? Because they were like, no one applied for it, we're just giving it to him. That could be viewed as problematic. And so they said, well, this is what we'll do. So in the Austin Bar Association Board Constitution, they amended it to where a student at the Texas Law, either the SBA president, because they knew I was SBA president, or the SBA president's designee will always be an ex officio member of the Austin Bar Association. So in our constitution at the SBA, I wrote that the president must designate the chief diversity officer as the member of the Austin Bar Association Board of Directors moving forward, because I understood that it might be a long time before we get another Black SBA president. You know, it's not guaranteed that the last SBA president we had, she was white. She was like member of Federalist Society. If you don't know who that is, you will when you get to law school. Which I'm not saying is bad to be conservative. I'm just saying that since I created this opportunity, I want to make sure that it's benefiting students of color moving forward when I'm gone and graduated and I'm doing other things. And so, so that's kind of how I accomplished what I did. And those are some of the things I've done in those roles.
Anthony, I'm gonna have to holler at you offline. And quickly, selfishly, I'm gonna ask a question for me. I plan on running for SBA president in the upcoming election. You got any tips or advice for me?
Absolutely. Let's definitely talk offline. We can go over some campaign strategy for sure.
I love it. I love it. And I really like that chief diversity officer position. That's something that I think I'm going to want to incorporate as well, for sure.
Sounds good.
So another question for all the panelists, and again,
hold on real quick. We gotta let Marshall answer this.
Oh, I'm sorry, Marshall. My bad. See, I was over here having technical difficulty. My Wi-Fi shut out on me and all this. Sorry, Marshall.
I'm good, TJ. No worries.
I'm like, man, don't cut our boy Marshall out.
I'll be brief.
Marshall, if you could just touch, I know you're super involved in everything, but I think you had mentioned not only being on SBA exec, which I want, if you could touch on that process, right? Because I think there's different, you've touched on, there's different levels of involvement. Like you don't have to run everything, right? But you can still be involved. So what was that process like? And also if you could touch on the clinic, because I think Anthony had spoke about too, just the benefit of the clinic. I'm in my I'll be 2 full years in the pro bono clinic. I would live and die by that. It has helped not only my resume, I've done it also while working, right? So I had a job and I did the clinic, and now I'm so invested in my clients that I don't even know if I'll be able to leave them when I graduate, but it's been such a benefit. And I think it's a resume boost, and it's also like right there within your school. So you're not having to travel, you're not having to worry about that. So touch on, kind of your involvement in both of those things. And also we got a question in the chat, also LLM. I'm so sorry, I forgot about that. So those 3 things, if you could give us a quick rundown.
Yeah, I'll start with LLM because I applied to that first. It was at the end of my 1L year. I think at least at John Marshall, you need 2 semesters of grades. Application to it was fairly straightforward. I think just a 1-page personal statement, and then they look at that in your GPA. But with doing that, it involves many more classes. So you're getting a 2nd degree. And my goal was, I've been in higher education for longer than I've wanted to. I just kind of want to get to the real world soon. So I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it in 3 years. I could say maybe I'll take an extra semester, but I know that could get pushed to another year. So going into it, I really had to plan every credit out until for my 2nd and 3rd year. And that meant giving up both summers to do classes. So I took full load both summer. I think last summer I had 12 credit hours and 7 weeks in the summer, and it was brutal, but just live and breathe the LLM during that time. I really enjoy the LLM classes. I think they're very different from the core law school classes, whereas just take torts, for example, there's kind of a finite amount of information that you need to learn for the final exam, and it's just how well you can do on a multiple choice or written exam, 100% of your grade usually, just on intentional torts, negligence, these areas of law that you got to know inside and out. Whereas the LLM, I think there was a little more freedom to explore what you're interested in. So you'd be listening to lectures just as you normally do, read cases, but then about halfway through the semester, almost all of them are paper-based, so just a final paper. So halfway through the semester, you kind of present to the rest of the class, and the professor goes like taking a class on Homeland Security, for example, where the final paper, as long as it related to law and Homeland Security, you could explore whatever you wanted, which you don't see too often with other law school classes, where it's more dictated of you have to write a brief on this, arguing this, or here is, I think, at the start of COVID for Homeland Security. So I was like, how is COVID affecting Homeland Security? And I could kind of explore how I wanted to, rather than being told, hey, argue this Homeland Security legal doctrine. So I've really enjoyed the LM classes. It's been a lot of work to try to fit it in 3 years, but at the end, I'll drop my email and everything, contact. If anyone has questions on LM, I think it's a great way to make yourself stand out academically, along with doing other organizations. In terms of clinic, again, application process, fairly straightforward. I think they look at grades and personal statements. And our International Human Rights Clinic is only, I think, 8 or 10 students, because there's only one supervising attorney. They also look at language. So most of our clients are South American or Middle East. But I didn't speak Arabic, speak a little Arabic, but no Spanish. So didn't get in necessarily from that, but I speak French. So we have a couple African French speaking clients. So it's really good opportunity to use language skills if you have those, because my whole background was in kind of languages and cultures, and not much room to use that in law school necessarily. So if you have an extra language and there's a clinic related to that, bilingual or trilingual students are really beneficial for those. The clinic itself, we have kind of 2 main areas we focus at. We do impact reports, which find some human rights violation, write a report, and try to present it to the UN. And then we also represent clients in immigration, trying to get refugee status, gain asylum. Our impact report, I'll give us a little plug. We haven't really been able to talk about it much because it's confidential until published. But yesterday, after 3 years of it being worked on, it finally got published. So it's really cool to have reports that you can kind of go to employers and be like, hey, I've interviewed people all over the world for this report. We've done all this research. We presented it to the UN, really kind of hands-on work, where if you kind of want to work in human rights as a field, that's gold to have that kind of under your belt. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, if you have more questions on clinic and stuff, feel free to reach out and go into more details on that. And then SBA, again, I ran kind of on a whim. I saw that I wasn't involved with SBA at all. Another mistake, I think, that I kind of regret not getting involved before my final year. But I saw there was an exec position for graduate student liaison. I was a big proponent of the LLM and other joint degrees. So ran, but I would say what surprised me most is that probably 95% of what I do on SBA is general exec board, helping draft emails, talking to different administrators. I mean, TJ knows we have things that come up all of a sudden, and we just kind of got to work through it, either write a letter, talk to students, poll the students, find out what kind of complaints are and how we can address them. So being on the exec board, outside of, I'd say, president, treasurer, secretary, most of the work is just kind of with the rest of the exec board as a team.
Awesome.
Yeah, I have
Thank
the
you.
pleasure.
And I know
Oh,
we're
sorry.
running out of time, so we have one more question that TJ wants to pose. So if our panelists have a second, we'll just pose it real quick. TJ, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I was gonna say real quick too. I have the pleasure of serving on the SBA board with Marshall, and we've been extremely busy this year. I think probably more than any year. But real quick, I guess to wrap things up, what advice would you give students that are looking to get involved? And let's start with Tatiana.
Yeah, so my advice would be to first think about your passions. I didn't get to go into depth about like balsa and but that was like, as I mentioned, like a no-brainer for me. Like, I identify as a Black student. I'm passionate about making sure that Black students have the exposure and the access that they need to opportunities. So running for the balsa board was like, it. And running for anything is a little bit frightening, but it was like my passions is what really drove me to do that. Um, and then to also think about your skills when you're running for things. Like, what are you good at? Where can you add value, right? I touched on this theme that I keep with me of like giving to wherever I am. So when it came to running for EIC, I'm like, I know I have like good organization skills. Like I have good attention to detail. Like, these are all value adds I could bring to the journal. As I mentioned, like going to be like a 1L tutor or a TA. Like, I enjoy working with students. Like, I can add value to the student body by helping 1Ls navigate, a very tough year. So those are like the two things that I focus on. Your passions, your skills, and then also like just practically thinking about like your time. Like, how much time do you have to dedicate to these things, and how can you fit everything in? You don't want to overwork yourself, right? As Ali, I think, mentioned, you don't want to have like 10 things and then you can't do anything well. So you still have to be thoughtful and measured about what you take on. But as I said, passion and skills, those are, I think, the two things to think about when you're thinking about what you want to do.
Anthony?
Sure. I definitely want to reiterate what was said earlier about joining organizations as a 1L. These organizations understand you're a 1L and they're not going to put a ton on your plate. So oftentimes 1Ls are allowed to just show up and reap the benefits of the organization, and I say take full advantage of that. But at the same time, when you're a 2L and a 3L, then you should give back to the organization that is given to you. And one of the things that pains me is like at the BOSA at my school, virtually all the Black 1Ls benefit from BOSA. But when it's time to return the favor, 2L and 3L, a lot of them aren't as involved. So I would say join everything as a 1L and just go as you can. Sometimes you need to study, or you need to rest, or you might just need to watch something on Netflix to take your mind off of school. So don't be afraid to say no. But I would just say join everything you're interested in and just show up at your leisure and make sure you're putting the first thing first. But when you become a 2L and a 3L, decide like one or two organizations that you're really passionate about. If you're Black, it better be BOSA. But it could be APASA, it could be Chelsea, whatever organization it is, and get involved in that organization and give back to those organizations.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one thing that I do is I even try to join the other Infinity groups as well. I'm a part of ELSA, MELSA. I know there's others, and I just so I can kind of show my support for them. So when it comes down to Black issues and supporting BOSA, it's like, it kind of goes hand in hand as well. Marshall, you want to touch on it? What advice you would give the students?
Yeah, I think everything said has been great. I think do things that scare you. Law school can be scary and intimidating, and I never really want to work in a courtroom. That scares me, intimidates me, but it's like, hey, like there's mock trial or other competitions, like go and do it, because the experience you gain from it, each and every one, you can really see yourself grow in a speaker, advocate, things like that. I think also, speaking of advocate, do something that helps others. Like I have my job that I've been in 2 years, that's kind of a personal thing because I make money, it gives me experience, that's kind of a me thing. But then also we're becoming attorneys. We speak on behalf for people that can't or don't have a voice. So get involved with clinics if you can, help people pro bono, go to volunteer opportunities. I think lawyers in general kind of get a bad rap. And I think our generation can change that because there are more individuals that want to be advocates and really help others, not just go out and make the 6-figure salary and call it a day. So you can do all that, but I mean, still always keep pro bono in the back of your mind, keep the individuals that don't have a voice in mind, and they'll be much more fulfilling as well.
Great advice. Great advice from everyone on here. I see all of our panelists have provided their emails, which we are so grateful for. Thank you so much for allowing students the opportunity to follow up. As always, we encourage all of you here to do that. I will put everyone's contact information in our follow-up email. I'm so sorry we went over a little bit, but thank you so much, Tatiana, Anthony, and Marshall, for your time this morning. So beneficial, so many gems dropped. We really, I mean, I even learned stuff. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you here at the Impact Project. And thanks to all of our attendees for hopping on as well. Again, we will post the recording to our YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on Instagram to stay up to date at the.impact.project. So thank you all again so much. Have a great weekend wherever you are. We have like coast to coast pretty much on here today. So thanks so much. And hopefully we will keep in touch with all of our panelists and see you guys soon.
Thank you, Allie and TJ.